Currently, crimes committed in schools and universities, unfortunately, are ceasing to be something shocking. Moreover, in countries like the United States, this is a fairly common occurrence. However, the case of Amy Bishop was notable because she did not fit the established profile of a criminal. In addition, women rarely committed such crimes. What can be said about Bishop? From early childhood, she excelled in her studies and eventually earned a doctoral degree from Harvard. Her marriage was stable. She had no criminal record, and she did not use prohibited substances. And yet, she became the person who went too far in matters of honor and morality. In the end, her actions led to one of the most shocking tragedies that ever occurred within the walls of educational institutions. Amy Bishop was born on April 24, 1965 in the city of Iowa City, located in the eponymous state of Iowa, USA. Her parents were Sam and Judy Bishop. Sam was always a hardworking man. During the day, he studied at the University of Fine Arts, and at night, he worked as a watchman and janitor. The future spouses met at the Boston School of Arts. In a way, they were opposites of each other. Judy was a sociable woman with a developed sense of humor, while Sam was taciturn and withdrawn. In the year, Sam finally finished his studies and got a job as a teacher at the art faculty of Northeastern University. That's when the Bishops moved to the city of Braintree, located in the state of Massachusetts. In the same year, the couple had their second child, a boy named Seth. Braintree was a kind of closed community, a suburb for the middle class, located south of Boston. Sam and Judy easily blended into the ranks of the local residents. Perhaps it was Judy who won over those around her. From the very first day, she began participating in local public life. Moreover, she soon joined the city council, which was a kind of governing body. Her responsibilities included communication with representatives of the local government. And, given these circumstances, she even had some power. As for Amy, she was a rather sickly child. She had asthma. In her childhood, her parents had to go to the emergency room more than once. Due to the inability to spend time with friends outside, Amy became interested in science. At that time, she dreamed of finding a cure for asthma. Despite the fact that the girl received only good grades, she felt that her parents did not pay her enough attention. Strangely enough, the spouses devoted much more time to Seth. He was more successful in his studies and was popular at school. Amy, on the other hand, was always more of a loner. In third grade, she began learning to play the violin. Soon, Seth began doing it too. After a little practice, he once again surpassed his sister. Well, the boy was indeed very talented. Of course, Amy didn't like all this. Moreover, she was truly concerned about it. And Seth himself understood this perfectly. He felt his superiority over his sister, and perhaps that's why he never recognized her as a rival. Because of this, they often quarreled. What was even worse for Amy was that Seth was her younger brother. Having grown up a bit, Amy began studying genetics at Northeastern University. Soon, Seth enrolled there too. As before, he surpassed his sister, achieving greater accomplishments and successes in his studies. As a kind of hobby, Amy joined a club for fans of the game Dungeons and Dragons. It was there that she met her future husband, a guy named Jimmy Anderson. The girl quickly became attached to him. Interestingly, she preferred to call him James. She thought that name sounded much more elegant. At some point, Amy and Jimmy's communication led to a deterioration in her relationship with her brother. For Seth, Jimmy always seemed like a loser. Because of this, he didn't want his sister to get involved with such a person. In addition, Seth insisted that Amy leave the Dungeons and Dragons fans club music and join another, more popular club. In general, the girl's brother believed that she should communicate more with other, more successful people. One night in 1985, the Bishops returned home and discovered that the windows on the first and second floors were open. Entering inside, they finally realized that the robbers, whoever they were, had stolen practically all valuable items. The family was truly shocked by the intrusion of strangers. What worried them most was not the loss of material music values, but the fact that their private life had been violated. Outraged, Judy even wrote a letter to the local newspaper addressing the robbers. Not receiving the desired reaction, the Bishops decided that such a situation would never happen to them again. In the end, Sam went to a hunting store and bought a 12-gauge shotgun. Judy didn't want weapons in her house. However, Sam still put the shotgun in the closet located in the bedroom and placed the box of ammunition under the table. Over time, Seth's popularity continued to grow. Despite his young age, he had already managed to receive a large number of awards at science fairs at his university. But what irritated her most was not this, but the fact that her brother didn't even mention these achievements. It seemed to her that he treated them rather lightly. The girl learned about her brother's successes completely by accident. For example, when her father or mother told her about it. In December of the same year, Seth once again exalted music, himself over his sister, telling his parents that he didn't want anything for Christmas. The bishops were delighted with their son's words. In the end, Amy once again had to listen from her parents about how amazing and cool Seth was. At some point, the girl began to think that she would never be able to surpass her brother in popularity and attention from those around her. On December 6, 1986, Amy, who was 21 years old, was left alone in her parents' house. In the middle of the night, she heard extraneous noise and felt that someone wanted to break into the house. Remembering what happened a year earlier, she got seriously scared. Her immediate reaction was to go to her parents' bedroom and take that very 12-gauge shotgun that was in the closet. By this time, her father had already taught Amy how to load it. Once in the room, the girl approached the closet. Then she took out the weapon and prepared it for use. A few moments later, Amy was already ready for the stranger's visit. But after a few seconds of thought, she came to the conclusion that it was most likely one of her relatives. In fact, that's what it turned out to be. It was Seth. Amy asked her brother to help her unload the shotgun so that she could put it away before her parents returned. Surprisingly, when the girl tried to hand the weapon to her brother, it spontaneously fired, wounding Seth in the chest. Amy immediately panicked. As a result, she accidentally fired several more shots, damaging the wall of the house and the roof. But the strangest thing was not this at all. For some unimaginable reason, Amy did not call the emergency services to ask for help, but fled the house, taking the shotgun with her. Once outside, she tried to stop a passing car, but unsuccessfully. Soon the girl reached the nearest auto repair shop and demanded to give her any car. Hearing the refusal, Amy simply sat on the ground. Meanwhile, the mechanics called the police. Soon, law enforcement officers arrived at the scene. Assessing the situation, they ordered Amy to immediately put the weapon on the ground and surrender. Well, she didn't agree right away, but in the end, they managed to arrest her. A little later, her parents finally returned home. Around the same time, Seth was taken to the hospital. It turned out that the shot hit a vital area, and the guy died from the received wound. While at the police station, Amy stated that everything happened accidentally. She allegedly fled only because she had a panic attack. The girl's mother reported that she was present at this incident and confirmed her daughter's words. After that, Judy demanded a meeting with the police chief. At that time, it was a man named John Vincent Polio. John was a good acquaintance of Judy Bishop. He joined the service in 1950, and 12 years later, he took the highest position and acquired a reputation as a cunning and eccentric person. Perhaps that's why many colleagues immediately disliked him. Soon, Judy's request was granted, and she and Polio met face to face. 11 days later, the forensic expert reported that Seth Bishop's death occurred as a result of an accidental gunshot from a firearm. Many in the police department then disagreed with the expert's conclusions. However, nothing could be done about it anymore. Despite all the commotion that Amy caused, the district attorney didn't even press charges. In fact, the girl who shot her brother didn't spend a single day in a prison cell. From that very night, she was in her own home under the care of her parents. And most surprisingly, Amy never sought help from a psychologist in connection with what happened. Although, perhaps, such a traumatic episode as her brother's death did not cause her any particular negative emotions. Soon after that, Amy immersed herself in her studies. As a result, she wrote a strong dissertation that attracted the attention of recruiters from Harvard University. They offered her education, and she immediately agreed. In the same year, she married the already familiar Jimmy. Surprisingly, the wedding took place in the same church where the memorial service for Seth had previously been held. I note that Amy never wanted to take her husband's last name. This was done with the expectation that in the future, her work and research in the field of genetics of music would become known. In other words, She wanted her maiden name and surname to appear in various articles and music publications. Sometime after the wedding ceremony, Jimmy received a job offer as a biologist, but Amy insisted that he stay in his previous place and devote more time to household chores. In addition, she once again reminded her husband that he should use the name James everywhere he went. Over the next 4 years, Amy and Jimmy had 3 daughters. Studies were difficult for her. It was extremely hard for her to get the desired doctoral degree from Harvard. However, after long efforts, she still achieved her goal. At the same time, some university staff who saw her final work called it mediocre. They sincerely believed that it did not deserve a doctoral degree. In essence, graduating from Harvard became an important aspect for the girl's personality formation. Education at such a university is indeed considered a great achievement. There's nothing wrong with being proud of it. Music, however, Amy took it to the extreme. Even when she went out of the house for bread to the bakery, she introduced herself as Dr. Amy Bishop, a Harvard graduate. Despite the fact that the girl was a good student, she did not cope with her work in the Harvard laboratory. Her scientific supervisor, a man named Paul Rosenberg, noted that Amy had various problems. For example, she easily got into stupid quarrels with her colleagues and childishly got upset when they negatively commented on her doctoral dissertation. This even prompted Dr. Rosenberg to provide a report to higher management about Amy's unsatisfactory work. She obviously reacted violently to this. The girl screamed and even lunged at other laboratory staff with her fists. In the end, because of such a reaction to other staff, Dr. Paul Rosenberg convinced her to leave the job. Later, the man stated that the girl's behavior that day scared him. In his opinion, a person like Bishop was one day capable of crossing the line. Well, running ahead, I'll say that he was absolutely right. On December 19, 1993, when Dr. Rosenberg and his wife were out of town, their maid came across a strange white box lying on the porch of their house. The woman picked it up and placed it on the kitchen table, and then continued with her chores. Later, when the doctor and his wife returned home, they noticed the box and got seriously worried. In general, there was nothing unusual about boxes appearing on the doorstep of the house. Music, however, in those years in the United States, a bomber was operating who similarly dropped boxes to innocent people. But let's not focus on this story, since Dr. Rosenberg and his wife were not expecting any packages. They treated this box with great suspicion. The man made a risky decision to carefully cut out its central part instead of opening it in the usual way. Looking at what was inside the box, he was surprised to find that there were some wires and pipes. The man rather work with her was impossible. Later, namely in 2001, Amy and Jimmy had another child. The boy was named Seth in honor of the girl's younger brother. Surprisingly, the baby was born on the same day as his deceased uncle. A year later, while in one of the city's restaurants, Amy tried to take a high chair, but the restaurant staff said that it had already been reserved by another woman. Despite this, Amy demanded to give the chair to her. When she refused again, our today's heroine stated, "I am Dr. Amy Bishop. Don't you know who I am?" Obviously, none of those gathered in the restaurant knew her. In the end, due to the commotion that arose, Amy was asked to leave. But before leaving, she hit the girl she had quarreled with earlier on the head. As a result, she was arrested. Later, Amy was charged with assault and disorderly conduct. Surprisingly, all charges were subsequently dropped. The prosecutor insisted only that Amy take anger management courses. However, she never did so. In 2003, Amy received a position as an associate professor of biology at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Starting work, she directed her efforts toward obtaining the desired professor status. To do this, she needed several scientific papers in specialized journals. Pursuing this goal, Amy and Jimmy began working on creating an automated cell incubator intended for biomedical research. They did all this exclusively in their free time. Almost immediately, it became clear that this project could bear a lot of fruit. Soon, Amy and her husband received a grant of $25,000, taking third place in a local technology competition. The university president stated that, in his opinion, Amy's invention could change the way research is conducted. Sometime later, the woman received another grant. This time, the amount was simply staggering and amounted to $1,250,000. However, all this money turned out to be not a very successful investment. Over the next 5 years, Amy published only 3 scientific papers. All of them were published in small commercial publications. Then, many scientists began to say that Bishop's ideas were inexorably outdated, expensive, and unnecessary. It seemed that Amy was deliberately delaying the project deadlines so as not to harm her ego. As a teacher, the woman also did not cope 100%. Many of her students noted that she was an incredibly smart, perhaps even brilliant scientist, but at the same time a terrible person and teacher. In addition, Amy constantly talked about politics in class. She demonstrated her fanatical adherence to President Obama's vision. Several people from among the students even created a petition to ban her from teaching. This was generally quite rare in the educational environment. True, Amy's superiors rejected the petition, deciding that the students had made hasty conclusions about their teacher's work. It was assumed that the main motive for ignoring the petition was the fact that the woman had previously received a degree from Harvard. This circumstance benefited the university where Amy worked. Perhaps it even allowed it to receive much more funding from investors. Despite all the criticism directed at her, Amy finally completed a new study in the field of neurology. This happened in 2009. At the same time, her other works related to less important research were published. All this allowed her to get closer to obtaining professor status. However, it later became known that all these studies were published in journals that were ready to cover anything as long as they were paid. In addition, it turned out that it was not she herself who stood behind these studies, but her husband. In other words, striving to obtain the position of professor, Amy used her husband's works and paid for their publication. In general, any associate professor after 5 years of work at the university could apply for professor status. Upon reaching this term, a process began during which other professors carefully checked the candidate's compliance with the established requirements. As a rule, this happened even in cases where the candidate had no published research behind them. However, if an associate professor did not receive professor status after 6 years of work, they were often fired. Since Amy considered herself a brilliant specialist, her possible dismissal after 6 years of work was something unacceptable for her. And yet, after a lengthy check, the professors denied Amy the desired status. This once again infuriated her. She filed an appeal and a lawsuit for gender discrimination. The basis for this was a statement by one of the teachers who participated in the check. The man directly told her that he considered her crazy. Unfortunately, both Amy's appeal and lawsuit were ultimately rejected. In early February 2010, she received a letter stating that she would lose her position by the end of the semester. On Friday, February 12th of the same year, Amy conducted classes in anatomy, physiology, and biology as usual. Then she went home to have lunch with her husband. Later, Jimmy said that he noticed nothing unusual in his wife's behavior. After lunch, Amy asked her husband to drive her to the university. According to her, she had a scheduled meeting with the faculty. They wanted to discuss details of the upcoming semester, such as the program, budgets, and schedule. In general, Amy had no particular reasons to be present at this meeting, since it was about the next semester. In the afternoon, the 45-year-old Amy Bishop entered the conference room of the University of Alabama and sat at the table near the entrance door. The numerous attendees from among the professors and staff of the biology department were surprised to see her, but none of them showed it, and the meeting continued. The woman sat there for about 50 minutes. Usually, she actively participated in department meetings, but this time she just remained silent and seemed thoughtful. When one of the professors finished his report, Amy slowly stood up from the table and took out a 9mm semi-automatic pistol from her bag. The room immediately plunged into silence. A moment later, the woman opened music fire. The shots were targeted. In the end, the weapon was directed not only against the people Amy particularly hated. No, this affected absolutely everyone. That's what happened with Dr. Deborah Moriarty, who was one of the few whom Amy could consider her friend. Deborah even voted to keep the woman in her position. When Amy pointed the gun at Deborah, she asked not to pull the trigger. However, the woman didn't even flinch. She just aimed and tried to fire. Fortunately, at that moment, the gun music jammed. Then Deborah rushed across the room. The woman managed to escape along with other teachers. They took refuge in the neighboring meeting room, blocked the door, and called the police. Meanwhile, Bishop herself hid in the university restroom. She wrapped the gun in her jacket and threw it into the trash bin. Then she went into the laboratory and asked a student if she could borrow his mobile music phone. Amy called Jimmy and asked him to come pick her up. Soon, a SWAT team arrived at the scene. They slowly searched all the campus premises, evacuated students and faculty, and also found the weapon, which was still lying in the trash bin. Sometime later, one of the operatives came across a woman who matched the description of the criminal. He ordered her to stop, and Bishop did so without offering any resistance. In the end, handcuffs were on her wrists. Music around the same time, Jimmy arrived, who witnessed his wife being seated in a police car. Unfortunately, many teachers died on the spot that day. If Deborah Moriarty had not initiated the escape, thereby distracting Music Amy, the number of deaths would most likely have been different. At the initial stage of the investigation, detectives interrogated Jimmy, Amy's husband. They wanted to find out if he knew about his wife's intentions. The man admitted that he and his wife had a gun. However, he did not specify that recently they had started shooting targets with it. As for Amy herself, she stated that she was not in the conference room that day. Obviously, this statement sounded absurd, since more than 10 witnesses who personally knew her claimed that she was the culprit of this horrific tragedy. Soon, police officers searched the spouse's home. They seized all of Amy's electronic equipment and also found a piece of pipe that could have been used to create explosive devices, the box with which was placed under Dr. Rosenberg's door. The next morning, after Bishop was taken into custody, a man named Paul Fraser called the sheriff's department in Huntsville. He reported that he was the current chief of police in the city of Braintree, the place where Amy grew up. Next, Paul stated that he had information about another crime by the woman, as a result of which she shot her own brother. Since Braintree was a small town, everyone in the local police department knew about this, and that the former police chief John Polio had let Bishop go free. But only now, in light of recent events, everything finally began to make sense. A small internal investigation showed that the former police chief was a close friend of Judy Bishop, Amy's mother. It was she, as a member of the city council, who helped John get the coveted position. Realizing all this, Paul Fraser immediately called the Alabama State Police Department and informed his colleagues about the previous case. In addition, he pointed out that the previous police chief tried to cover up the crime. As a result, almost all documents related to that crime disappeared. Only a few reports mentioning Amy remained. The investigators tried to find any information about Seth's death in Polio's house, but all their actions were fruitless. Then they decided to try their luck by conducting a search in the house of the former Braintree police captain who participated in detaining Amy at the auto repair shop. This time, they managed to find some evidence pointing to an attempted carjacking. In addition, it became known that Amy pointed the gun at a police officer before she was arrested. All this back then could have led to charges of attempted assault with a firearm. At the same time, during the analysis of the chronology of events, another circumstance became known. It turned out that Judy, the mother of the theme, who claimed to have been present at the scene of the crime and said it was an accident, was actually in a completely different place. Witnesses claimed that at that time, the woman and her husband were at a farm, far from their own home. When this was revealed, some of the detectives suggested that Amy initially shot at the wall and ceiling, and only then pointed the shotgun at her brother. In this way, she tried to understand if the weapon was functioning properly. In their opinion, if Bishop had immediately pointed the shotgun at Seth, and it hadn't fired, that would have been the end for her, and she was well aware of it. At the trial, the woman tried to claim that she did not realize what she was doing. Because of this, the trial for the crime that occurred at the university was constantly postponed. Some time later, the prosecution offered Amy a deal. She had to take the blame for both the murder of her brother and what happened quite recently. This would allow her to avoid the death penalty. In addition, the prosecutor wanted to finish the case quickly and spare the victims and loved ones from the inconveniences and pain they experienced while in the courtroom. Initially, the woman hastened to refuse the deal. However, later, her parents convinced her. On June 16, 2010, the jury found Amy Bishop guilty of murdering her own brother Seth. 2 days later, while in the detention center, the woman used razor blades to inflict irreparable harm to her health. However, her life was saved by the guards who arrived in time. Later, namely on September 24, 2012, Amy was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the crime committed within the walls of the University of Alabama. Once in prison, Amy finally decided to take her husband's last name. She used this tactic so that her last name would not be associated with the crimes she committed. However, this did not help, because every single one continued to address her as Amy Bishop. In 2021, Amy's son Seth, like his uncle, died as a result of a gunshot wound. Huge thanks for watching. If you want to see more unique criminal stories and support the channel, you can go to Boosty via the link in the description. Thank you.